No one saw her come in. Barefoot, quiet, and carrying only a small bag, Ava Robinson slipped through the side door of the old community center. The janitor pretended not to notice. He had seen her before, always alone, always dancing when the building was empty. 17 years old, homeless, a quiet storm in a world that refused to listen. By day, Ava stayed at a shelter downtown, sharing space with strangers, trying to stay invisible. But by night, she came alive. In the silence of the abandoned gym, she moved as if every step was a word she was not allowed to speak. Her body told stories her voice never dared to. The only thing she owned was her dream. One dream. To dance on a real stage. She heard about the auditions from a girl at the shelter. The city's elite performing arts conservatory was opening a few spots for diverse talent. They used the word like decoration, but for Ava, it was hope. She had no formal training, no coach, no fancy resume. But she had something else. Hours of practice, aching muscles, and a fire so deep it burned through her shoes. The morning of the audition, she washed her face in the shelter's sink, pinned her curls back, and wore the cleanest clothes she had. Then she walked 5 miles to the conservatory, heart pounding with every step. Inside the building, the air felt colder. The walls whispered money, power, and perfect resumes. Other dancers stretched in warm-up jackets with embroidered names. Coaches gave last-minute advice. Ava stood alone in the corner, trying not to be noticed. But she was noticed. Margot Langford, the conservatory's director, spotted her right away. A tall woman with sharp eyes and a sharper voice. She looked at Ava like she had seen dirt on a white carpet. "You must be in the wrong place," Margot said loudly, her voice echoing. "This is not an open class. It is an audition for serious dancers." Ava stepped forward. Her voice was steady. "I am here to audition." There was laughter in the room. One girl even took out her phone to record. Margot raised an eyebrow. "Very well. Let us see what you can do." The music started. Ava began to dance. For a few seconds, the room fell silent. Her movements were not polished, but they were powerful. Raw, real. Her arms cut through the air with purpose. Her feet moved like they had something to prove, but then Margot stopped the music. "That is enough," she said coldly. "You clearly do not belong here. Technique is everything. Passion is not enough. Thank you for your effort." A guard was called to escort her out. As Ava walked away, her eyes burned, but she did not cry. She had been rejected before. But this one hurt deeper. This was not just a no. It was a message. People like her were not welcome. What no one noticed was the boy in the back row. Leo Bennett sat quietly in his wheelchair, holding a sketch pad. 13 years old. He had been paralyzed since birth. His father was one of the conservatory's biggest donors. Everyone treated him like glass, fragile, delicate, untouched. But Leo saw what others missed. He watched Ava with wide eyes. Her movements stayed in his mind even after she was gone. Something about her stirred a part of him he thought was asleep. She had walked out of that room empty-handed, but she had left something behind. And Leo Bennett had no idea that one day, the same girl they had thrown out would change everything. Not just for him, but for thousands. The shelter hallway smelled like old bread and tired dreams. Ava walked in, holding the silence close to her chest. No one asked how the audition went. No one needed to. The look in her eyes said everything. She sat on her bunk, knees pulled to her chest. But she did not break. She was not finished. Later that week, a staff member handed her a job flyer. The conservatory needed overnight cleaners, part-time, low pay. She stared at the paper for a long time. Then she folded it neatly and walked 5 blocks to apply. That same building, the same cold halls. But now she entered through the service door. For the next few nights, Ava scrubbed the floors she once dreamed of dancing on. She carried buckets past mirrors that had once reflected her rejection. Every room smelled like polish and memory, yet she kept going. Once, near midnight, the sound of music pulled her to a practice room. She could not help herself. She stepped inside, placed the mop in a corner, and let her body speak again. Quietly, freely. She danced like no one would ever see her. But someone did. Leo Bennett had trouble sleeping. That night, he rolled down the hallway in his wheelchair, searching for silence. What he found was Ava. He stopped in the doorway. The lights were dim. Ava did not notice him at first. She was spinning slowly, hands moving like waves. Her expression was full of something he could not name, but it filled the room. When she finished, she turned and froze. Leo looked at her, not with pity, but with wonder. "You dance like you were chasing something," he said quietly. Ava stepped back, unsure what to say. "I am Leo," he added. "My father is Daniel Bennett." Ava lowered her head. She knew that name. He was the head of the conservatory board, the man who wrote the checks and signed the rules. "I saw you at the audition," Leo said. "They were wrong." She stayed quiet. Leo wheeled closer. "Can I tell him what I saw?" Ava shook her head. "It will not matter." But it did. The next morning, Daniel Bennett sat in his office, listening to his son for the first time in weeks. Leo spoke with urgency, describing Ava's dancing, her fire, and how it made him feel less broken. "She makes me want to move again," Leo said. "Not just with my body, with everything." Daniel studied his son, unsure if this was real or another dream he would forget by morning. But that afternoon, he asked the conservatory staff to track Ava down, not to offer applause, but a quiet deal. No stage, no lights. Not yet. They offered her a scholarship, under one condition. She would help Leo regain confidence, not as a teacher, not as a therapist, but as someone who understood pain, silence, and the need to rise from it. Ava agreed, without a second thought. Each evening, after cleaning the floors, she sat with Leo in the empty dance room. They talked. Then they moved. Small steps. Simple rhythms. Nothing fancy. She taught him to feel the beat in his chest before trying to find it in his limbs. Weeks passed. The building that once rejected her now held her secret return. No one else knew, not yet, but something powerful had begun in the shadows. A connection, a spark. And while the world still saw her as a girl from nowhere, the foundation of her future was quietly taking shape in the same place that had tried to erase her. What came next would surprise everyone, especially those who thought she had already disappeared. Every evening, the old wooden floors of the conservatory felt different. As if they were listening, Ava no longer came just to clean. She arrived with purpose. Her nights belonged to Leo now. At first, his movements were shaky, limited to small motions, but Ava never rushed him. She taught him to breathe through the pain, to close his eyes and hear the rhythm before chasing it. He laughed more. He cried sometimes too. Both were part of the process. "You do not just teach dance," Leo said one night. "You teach feeling." Together, they built something quiet but powerful. They practiced alone in empty rooms, far from the spotlight. But slowly, their energy began to spill out. A few staff members started staying late just to watch. They never said anything, but they felt it. Something rare was unfolding. By week 6, Leo had taken his first steps without support, guided only by music and Ava's steady voice. Daniel Bennett watched from the window, stunned. He saw his son's shoulders lift, his eyes shine. It was the kind of progress no doctor had promised, Yet the person behind it was still just the janitor in the system's eyes. Ava never asked for more, but not everyone stayed silent. Margot Langford noticed the whispers. Her control over the conservatory, once absolute, had begun to slip. She heard stories of Ava dancing again, of staff quietly calling her the spark, of Leo's strange recovery. It unsettled her, so she pushed back. She called meetings. She reminded everyone that the conservatory had rules, standards. She spoke of integrity and proper channels. Then, she went further. She began telling people that Ava had lied, that her story was fake, that she was manipulating Leo for attention, that her whole past could not be proven. Her words were sharp and cold, dressed as concern. Daniel listened carefully but said little. His heart leaned toward Ava, but his position demanded caution. Still, he began asking quiet questions. Who hired her? Why was her talent not documented? Why had no one seen what she could really do? He began watching Ava more closely, not with doubt, but with wonder. One day, as Ava helped Leo through a stretch, a woman in a dark sweater stood quietly in the doorway, holding a camera. Her name was Sophie Lynn, a documentary filmmaker invited by Daniel months ago to create a piece on the conservatory's impact. But she had found something else, something unexpected. She had started filming Ava and Leo, secretly unsure where the story would go. But every time her lens captured their sessions, it felt like truth was unfolding in front of her. She filmed Ava teaching Leo to trust his body. She filmed Ava dancing alone, long after her shift ended. She captured the quiet strength that words could not describe. "This is not just about recovery," Sophie whispered once behind the camera. "This is a quiet revolution." But Ava still cleaned the mirrors before she danced in front of them. She still used the back entrance. She still carried herself as someone who knew how quickly doors could close. And yet, without permission, she had started to open new ones. Margot did not know how to stop her. Her old tricks, fear, rumor, control, were not working. The conservatory, once frozen by tradition, had started to move again. Not because of any formal policy, not because of any public decision, but because one girl, once rejected and forgotten, chose not to disappear. What no one had planned had already begun, and it was too late to undo. The silence did not last long. One morning, just before sunrise, a leaked email reached the inbox of a local journalist. Attached were internal documents, real names, real numbers. They showed something many had whispered about for years but could never prove. Margot Langford had quietly blocked dozens of applications from talented students, most of them Black, Latino, or from low-income neighborhoods. Worse, she had been moving diversity grant money into a special projects fund that had nothing to do with inclusion and everything to do with her personal travel and private consultants. The headline dropped before noon. Exposed. Conservatory director accused of racial discrimination and misuse of funds. By evening, it was everywhere. The conservatory, once praised for its legacy, now sat at the center of a scandal. The timing could not have been more powerful. Just one day earlier, Sophie Lynn had released the trailer for her new documentary, The Girl They Tried to Erase. It opened with a close-up of Ava, alone in the practice room, dancing with nothing but shadows around her. The footage of Leo's first steps followed, then Ava teaching him to spin slowly, carefully, while whispering, "You are more than what they see." The internet exploded. Millions shared the trailer. Comments poured in. Young people who had been denied chances saw themselves in Ava. Teachers, parents, artists, everyone had something to say. What she did with nothing, some directors could not do with everything. Margot tried to defend herself. She called the leaks taken out of context. She claimed the trailer was overly dramatized, but her voice no longer carried weight. The board met in emergency session. They asked Margot to step down. She refused. so they fired her. 2 days later, she was formally charged with embezzlement and discrimination under federal education law. The conservatory made a public apology. Daniel Bennett led the press conference. He did not hide behind soft words. This institution failed the very communities it was supposed to uplift. We ignored talent, silenced voices, and allowed power to be misused. That ends today. The leadership team resigned together. A full investigation was launched. New rules for transparency and equity were announced, and then came the moment no one had expected. Daniel turned to Ava. "We do not just want your forgiveness," he said in front of cameras. "We want your vision. Would you be willing to lead the design of a new program, one that finally lives up to the word inclusion?" Ava said nothing for a long time. Then she nodded. "I will do it," she said, her voice clear and calm. But not alone. There are too many voices still unheard. She asked for a team made up of students, artists, and educators from different cities and backgrounds. She requested that every decision be reviewed by young people with lived experience. She asked that the first students to join the new program be those who had once been rejected, without a fair chance. No one argued. The halls of the conservatory began to shift. The banners changed. The staff changed. Even the way auditions were held changed. No more closed doors. No more silent rules. No more empty promises. Ava did not want to just correct the past. She wanted to rewrite the future, and she had already proven she could. On the streets outside the conservatory, people gathered. Some brought flowers. Others brought letters. One girl held a sign that read, "Thank you for showing the world what real power looks like." Ava walked past them quietly, not seeking praise. She still wore the same old shoes. She still moved, like someone who knew what it meant to be ignored. But now, the world was listening, and the doors that had once slammed shut behind her were finally open, for good. The rehearsal room looked nothing like it once had. The lights were softer. The walls, once plain and cold, now held bright paintings by children from the neighborhood. And at the center of it all stood Ava Robinson. She raised her hand gently. "From the top," she said. 50 students, all from different walks of life, took their places. Some wore braces on their legs. Some moved with hearing aids or wheelchairs. Others had never touched a dance floor before this day. They came from city shelters, small towns, and even distant states. Many had once been told they did not belong in places like this. Now, they did. Ava watched them move. She gave no long speeches. She simply worked, with focus, patience, and care. When one student missed a step, another helped. When one froze, with fear, Ava stood beside them, dancing until they found the rhythm again. In the front row stood Leo Bennett. He no longer needed his wheelchair. He now walked with special crutches, his smile more confident with each passing day. His doctors had no clear answer, but they all agreed his progress was not just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, something deeper. They called it a breakthrough. In healing through connection, Ava called it the power of being seen. Across the room, the conservatory's new director, Daniel Bennett, stood watching. "She's changing everything," he whispered to his assistant. And she was. Outside the building, lines formed each day. Families hoped for a spot in the program Ava had created. Letters arrived daily, from parents, schools, even hospitals. Kids who had once been excluded now had a stage, and someone who believed in them. News traveled fast. First, a small arts night. College in Boston invited Ava to speak. Then came Yale, then Stanford. Even global institutions like Oxford requested her insight on building inclusive spaces in the arts. She turned down many. "My work is here," she said. "These students come first." But she accepted a few, choosing places that promised real change, not just words. In every talk, she spoke clearly and humbly. She shared stories, not theories. She spoke about how art could heal, connect, and transform, not just perform. Soon, her name became a symbol of something new, not just talent, not just success, but justice, kindness, and vision. Meanwhile, in a small apartment far from the conservatory, Margot Langford sat alone. She opened another envelope, another job rejection. Even neighborhood dance schools would not return her calls. The mansion was gone. The designer clothes had been sold to pay legal fees. The whispers about her name had turned into silence, cold, sharp silence. She poured herself a glass of cheap wine, staring at the wall where a painting once hung. Her phone had stopped ringing months ago. Former friends crossed the street when they saw her. Some even pretended they had never known her. She turned on the television, flipping past channels until one stopped her. There was Ava, speaking at a youth summit. Behind her, Leo stood with a group of smiling dancers. The crowd clapped as Ava explained how real inclusion worked, not by charity, but by removing the walls that never should have been there. Margot watched without blinking. This was the girl. She once threw out of an audition room. Now she was leading a movement. Margot's hand shook slightly as she turned off the screen. She was not angry anymore, just empty. The world had moved forward and left her behind. Back at the conservatory, Ava sat with Leo during a break. He asked, "Do you think people really change?" Ava looked at him, then at the room full of students learning to believe in themselves. "I think some people get lost," she said. "But others find new paths, because someone held the door open long enough for them to walk through." She stood again and called out, "Positions, everyone!" And just like that, the music began again. This was no longer the stage that had rejected her. This was the stage she had rebuilt, from the ground up, with everyone in mind. The studio lights were bright, but Ava Robinson sat calm and steady. Her eyes did not shift. Her hands did not shake. Across from her sat the CNN anchor. The cameras were live. Millions were watching. Behind Ava, clips played silently on the screen. Children dancing, murals blooming across city walls, classrooms once quiet now filled. With music and movement, the anchor leaned forward. "You were once denied a place at this very institution. You were told you did not belong. Now you lead it. So, I have to ask, what do you feel when you see Margot Langford's name?" The question hung in the air. The studio fell silent. Ava looked straight into the camera. "I feel nothing personal," she said slowly. "She did what people like her have done for years. Close doors, protect power, and pretend some voices do not matter." She paused. "But the best revenge," she added, "is not humiliation. It is creation. It is building something so strong, so beautiful, and so full of truth, that the ones who tried to erase you are forced to see what they lost." A moment passed. Then came applause, not just from the crew in the studio, but across the internet. Within minutes, the quote began spreading. It appeared on posts, walls, even in classrooms. Backstage, Leo waited. When Ava stepped out, he greeted her with a proud smile. "You did not just rise," he said. "You lifted thousands with you." She smiled, but said nothing. Her work was far from finished. The next day, the news ran a special segment. Ava Robinson, the girl they tried to erase. The camera moved through the conservatory's new hallways. It showed children learning ballet with interpreters beside them. It showed students painting with one hand while using the other to hold onto crutches. It showed a stage full of kids from every race, background, and ability. One little boy looked straight at the camera and said, "I never thought someone like me could dance here." Another whispered, "Ava made space for me." Across the country, people cried watching. But in a small apartment with the curtains drawn, Margot Langford sat alone on a worn-out couch. Her television played the segment, but her eyes looked tired. She held the remote loosely in her hand, unsure whether to turn it off or let it run. She watched the murals painted with messages of hope. She saw classrooms where young black and brown girls danced freely in spaces she once ruled. She saw Ava on that stage, not angry, not bitter, but full of grace. The truth settled heavy in Margot's chest. This girl, the one she had thrown out, had not just returned. She had rewritten everything. No press conference would change that. No carefully written apology would erase what had already been built. Margot had spent her life guarding gates. Ava had removed them. Outside, Ava stood near the edge of the school's rooftop garden. Leo stood beside her, looking down at the city below. "Do you ever think about the day you walked into that audition?" Leo asked quietly. Ava nodded. "All the time." "Do you wish it had gone differently?" She took a long breath. "No," she said, "because if it had, I might have never seen what was truly broken, and I might have never tried to fix it." They stood in silence, the wind moving gently around them. Below, students poured out into the courtyard, laughing, talking, dancing. No one seemed out of place. No one looked afraid to be themselves. This was not just a school anymore. It was proof that talent can come from anywhere, that stories can change when one person dares to rise and brings others with them, that redemption is louder than revenge, and that some endings are not endings at all. They are beginnings. The banners now flew in 12 cities. Each one carried the same name, the Ava Robinson School for Creative Arts. From Chicago to Atlanta, from Boston to Los Angeles, children stepped into bright buildings filled with color, sound, and movement. Students who once felt invisible now stood at center stage. Dancers who used wheelchairs, painters who once lived in cars, singers who spoke different languages. They were all welcome. The doors were never locked. Inside these schools, the rules had changed. No one was judged by where they came from. Talent was not measured by money. Art was not filtered by skin color, accent, or disability. And at the center of it all stood Ava Robinson. One morning, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend. Just one line. "You are on the cover." She opened the link. There it was. Time. Magazine, Ava's face. Bold letters. The voice they could not silence. She stared at the screen for a long time, not because she needed the praise, but because she remembered the day she was dragged out of that audition room. The way her hands had trembled, the way her heart had cracked. She had once been a girl with nothing but hope and rhythm in her feet. Now, she stood as a symbol, not of revenge, but of change. At the conservatory, Daniel Bennett called for a staff meeting. Leo rolled in beside him, now walking with only a cane. The teachers listened as Ava shared news of a new grant, one that would allow them to sponsor students from shelters across the country. After the meeting, the three of them sat in Ava's office. Leo leaned back in his chair. "Do you think she ever saw this coming?" Ava looked out the window. "She thought she knew me," she said. "Because of where I came from, because of the clothes I wore, because I was quiet. She thought she saw the end of my story. She turned to them. But she never imagined I would become the very future she feared." Daniel nodded. He had once sat on the edge of silence, afraid to choose sides. Now he sat proudly beside the girl who had changed everything. Across town, in a dim apartment with cracked walls and old furniture, Margot Langford sat in silence. The news no longer mentioned her name. Universities that had once invited her turned her away. Her mansion had been sold. Her awards had gathered dust in a box under her bed. People no longer feared her. They had forgotten her. She watched the television screen as young dancers twirled across a stage under golden lights. One of them wore braces on her legs. Another had scars from a fire. All of them smiled. The camera zoomed out, showing the name of the performance. The girl they tried to erase. Margot turned off the screen. No words left to defend her past. No legacy to hold on to. At that same moment, Ava stood at the edge of a grand theater in New York City. The crowd waited. Parents, teachers, artists, and young students filled every seat. Backstage, little dancers stretched and whispered to one another. Some were nervous. Ava knelt beside a young boy wearing a patched-up costume. He looked scared. She smiled gently. "You belong here." He nodded, eyes shining. The lights dimmed. The music began. And one by one, children of every background stepped onto the stage, not as tokens, not as exceptions, but as artists. Ava watched from the wings, her heart steady. This was never just about a stage. It was about making sure no child ever felt like their story did not matter. She did not need applause. She needed only this moment, because the final act had not ended. It had only just begun.